who are the giants who brought it to the West? Like he mentioned about Vivekananda. And he is the greatest reformer of Hinduism, as we know. Similarly, in music and dance also, there were great legends that came. He already stole my thunder by mentioning Ravi Shankar. Of course, we will be talking about that. Now, in this globalization process, who are the agents? Who are the people, individuals, institutions, governments? Who are the people spreading these ideas, spreading ideas about forms of music and dance? And who are the individuals? Again, as I said, among the individuals, who are the giants? And whom did they train? And who are these great gurus? Here is one I pointed out already, who have been trained so perfectly by those legends in India, and they have been spread all over the world by the thousands. And over 40, 50 years, these great gurus have been very patiently, like a spider, working away, hours and hours, and you see the great product of their efforts, like we saw last night, both in expression and perfect footwork, absolute rhythmic following of the syllables. So, we'll take a look at that. Then I like to zoom in, because it's a two-day affair. I don't know where I will end in 45 minutes or 1 hour, and then we'll continue tomorrow. I like to take a look closely at Canada's role in this globalization, and who are the people in Canada, in Ottawa, in Montreal, Vancouver, Winnipeg, Toronto. Who are the people, what are the institutions, both Western and Indian, who have contributed and are contributing towards this? Then I want to zoom in again, go back and point out modern examples of this globalization process in every country, including the Middle East, including some closed societies, how our art is spreading. Then, as a tribute, it's a personal subjective selection, I will be zooming in on 5 or 6 people who have contributed, in my opinion, the most. I call them the superstars of Indian music and dance. And these examples are not necessarily Indian, always keeping in mind the globalization process. What superstars have we produced through this Indian dance and music? How has the West been influenced? How did the West influence, again, the music and dances of India? So it is not a one-way street. Globalization is almost a circular phenomenon. And after some time, you never know where you began and where you will be ending. And this is the most marvelous thing. So, Phil was mentioning about Pythagoras. It will interest you to know. It comes from Sanskrit. Pythagoras. Pitru, Guru. Father, teacher. That's the origin of that. Or the notion of catharsis. Katha, rasa. Catharsis. So, the world is going round in a circular fashion. So, of course, I will not ignore the role of Bollywood. Bollywood has contributed tremendously over the last 60, 70 years, starting with that film Avara, all over the world. So, and we will take a look at some of the festivals, India festivals all over the world and so on and so forth. So, I will start with the first slide, if you will. Yes. So we'll proceed with the notion of globalization. What is globalization? Now, it has some good connotations and bad connotations. Globalization is mainly in political terms and economic terms, it has four main ideas. The first one is that it is a very bad thing. Globalization is very bad. It reminds you of oppression, exploitation, source of injustice and inequality. The weaker are getting punished and the stronger are getting stronger. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. America comes to mind. Globalization really means Americanization. Coca-Cola, McDonald's. This is what it is. Globalization really means the end of national borders. We're getting into one world. Or that it is global economic phenomenon and a rising tide lifts all the boats. But we're not concerned about these political and economic notions. We are concerned about cultural globalization, the good stuff. The positive things. And he has led us beautifully into those areas. And we are continuing in a separate dimension, the dimension of the arts, music and dance. And we don't have to go, music and dance are absolutely universal. They speak one language. The spirit is one, and that's where we will be headed. We will be examining a few details in between. So, some people have said globalization simply means a reflection on the issue of mobility, how things move, how expensive is it to move, and so on. But I like to take a little tack of this and say, substitute the word idea or ideas in place of the word things. So, how do ideas move? Who is moving them? How are they moving? How fast are these ideas moving? And what is the result of that moving of those ideas? This, in short, will be the summum bonum of what I will be talking about in these 2 days. Now, Jan Nanduri, in his book, Globalization and Culture, says that human integration and hybridization is the essence of it. He argues that it is possible to detect a cultural mixing across countries and regions back many centuries. This is absolutely true. This is absolutely true. Cultures have been interfacing with each other for as long as we know, as there was trade and commerce. And I call it, instead of globalization, I call it the orange phenomenon. The orange phenomenon is this. Not many of us know that it is India that has given the orange to the world. The orange went from India to the Middle East. The Islamic cultures have taken that to Morocco, to Algiers, and other places. and developed. And they took it to Spain. And from Spain, it went to Europe. And from Europe to the Americas. But notice what happened to the orange. Its size was changing, its color was changing, juice remained the same perhaps, but what happened? When it came to North America, the orange began to grow in size, big. And what's more, it became seedless, it became navel. So go back to the original orange, how it has changed its forms, its shapes. But orange has remained its basic character. It is the same thing, ladies and gentlemen, with Indian music and dance. Always these forms have been traveling, sometimes very fast, sometimes slowly, depending on technology and all that. And so, the orange phenomenon is what I would request you to keep at the back of your mind as we go through these things. But a few observations about globalization itself, the natural things that happen. First of all, globalization is a very, very slow process. 40 years of Menaka Thakkar's efforts, today we are seeing clear signs of the development, the contributions. So it's a very slow process. Vivekananda in 1893, when he came to the Chicago for the Parliament of Religions, sowed the seeds of Indian philosophy, modern seeds of Indian philosophy and religion. And it took so long to bear fruit. So globalization is a very slow process. And globalization process is often imperceptible. It comes on little cat-like feet. We don't observe it. We don't notice it as much. And one fine day, we see it in action, in effect. The third observation I have is globalization is inevitable. You cannot prevent one culture from learning from another. Each society reacts differently at a different pace. A confluence of circumstances. And so, technology has hastened the process. And so we cannot avoid. There is no such thing as cultural homogeneity. No culture is pure. We have always been receiving, we have always been giving. This is the universal phenomenon. History bears it out. And globalization works best in open societies. Closed societies will be impervious for a time. But it is my suspicion that all societies will become open gradually. You cannot avoid it. Just look at what is happening through YouTube, through Twitter, through Facebook, you name it. And closed societies, of course, will become open societies. Globalization will be speeded by the technology and media. Globalization is like a circle, and I'll give you plenty of examples how what has been given by India is received by the West or Asia, and it is improved or altered, changed, modified in whatever way, and it is given back in some other form to India, and India receives it, and then some other improvement goes on, and then it comes back. So this is a circular phenomenon that goes on. It's continuous. it is constantly improving, it's constantly energizing, and it is energized. And this is the glorious thing about this globalization. And the last observation I have is about globalization having a great potential for freedom and creativity. More creativity, more globalization means more freedom. Oh, there are 1,000 examples we can give to show how the West has been energized, and that freedom in ballet, in ordinary form, in music, hip-hop he was referring to, or acid rock. You'll be shocked to know that in 1982, there was a 52-year-old Indian who practiced and recorded in his own private studio in his house a record that came down as the very first one in acid rock. For the life of me, I don't know what it is, but I have read it is. Acid rock. He became the guru of acid rock. So, there is creativity going on. Only then the West has taken over. So, here is, as far as I can go, somebody must remind me, about 45 minutes or so. A Western critic has said, and this is true, all art, it seems, in the world has started with Bharata's Natya Shastra. There are no two arguments about it. A Western critic has said, and I quote, "Any study of art in any part of the world ought to reckon with the seminal ideas of Indian aestheticians whose insights can be used as one uses a can opener on a can to get at the meat." Of course, the work referred to here is Bharata's Natya Shastra. For 2000 years, it has been guiding the aesthetics of the world. You know Dr. Padma Subramaniam, the noted Bharatanatyam dancer, great scholar. This is what she says on the influence of Natya Shastra. Natya Shastra has been an influencing factor of creative art, not only in India, but throughout Asia. She actually wrote a monograph showing very convincingly the effect of Natya Shastra on Japanese music and dance tradition. And I had been there to Japan, in one city called Nara. I saw the statues of Yama, the Lord of Death, or the Lord of Justice, or Dharma as you want to call it, and Chitragupta, the chronicler of all the evils or the good deeds that men do. So, it is rooted. And she says that Natya Shastra is the fountainhead of various styles of dances in India. Not only dances, Sangeeta, it's music also. The various styles are only regional representation. So when we discuss the various forms of dance styles in India, the fountainhead is Bharata's Natya Shastra. But what they practice, whether it be Odissi, Kathak, Satriya, or Manipuri, or Kathakali, or Bharatanatyam, or Kuchipudi, or Kalari, whatever you talk about, they all have their origin in Bharata's Natya Shastra. But there are regional variations. And as Phil was mentioning, the Greek connection, Padma Subramaniam makes a very decent and very convincing connection. How Plato was opposed to aesthetics, to anything to do with dance and music initially. And Aristotle was not inclined because of being his pupil. And it was Alexander, when he came in 325 BC to India as a conqueror, he was told by the Greek gurus, please bring back some wisdom from India. Please bring back some books and people who are wise from India. And it is surmised that Alexander took at least one copy of Bharata's Natya Shastra. And he took a number of musicians also, that is the surmising, and some musical instruments. Then I read that Plato had actually visited India, went back, changed his opinions on art and aesthetics, and then what follows is Greek art, Greek architecture, and so on and so forth. So some people say, don't take all the pride, don't claim undue praise and all the undue credit. But there is another school saying, don't withhold claiming credit. For me, it does not matter. I am only concerned with what art is, what music and dance are. I do not care where they originated from. As long as they satisfy your sense of beauty, what does it matter where it has come from? Whether you claim credit or not is not that important to me, but it is a historical fact, and you should note it. So this is the importance of Bharata's Natya Shastra. Am I on time? You have to tell me when it is. So, Max Muller says, of all the ancient peoples, the Indians are the most civilized. And Max Muller has done more than anybody else to interpret, to interpret what India has really done. And I'm sure Phil will touch upon it. Goethe, the great German poet, said, if I have to read nothing else, it is enough for me to read the Bhagavad Gita. I am blessed that I have come into contact with the Bhagavad Gita. That is the quintessence of our culture. So, Hinduism, its philosophy, architecture, the epics, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Panchatantra, they all had a profound impact along with Buddhism, on Asia. The Buddhist chants had traveled wide. The Buddhist mantras and the practices have gone all over. In Bali, those of you who have seen the Balinese dances, the costumes are different. They are not the classical dance structures of India, but they have their own wonderful costumes. And they dance to gamelan music. That's the native Balinese music. Here is a globalization process going on forever. But what they have been true to is the epics, Mahabharata and the Ramayana. The same heroic qualities of sacrifice, of patriotism, of service to the nation by a king as the first servant, keeping promises to the parent, and so on. So Rama's great qualities, heroic qualities, and Krishna, they have remained very true to these. But the music has changed a little bit, instrumentation has changed. So you could see, Balinese people are not ethnic Indians, they're different. But their music and dance is Indian. That is very interesting. And when you go to South Asia, of course, Burma, Singapore, Malaysia, Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, they were all deeply, deeply influenced over the last 2000 years by Hinduism, its ways and music and dance. If you go to, for example, in Indonesia, the first part of the name will be Hindu, and the second part of the name will be Muslim. And glory be to them, they kept it that way. For example, when you listen to the word Bhumi Putra, son of the soil, Bhumi Putra, the Sanskrit words are still in existence. And in Indonesia, the cultures have mixed so beautifully. Even after the advent of Islam, they have retained these music and dance forms, and the costumes are different, and they still persist. Here are some things that you may not be knowing. I was myself thrilled when I was reading about this. In China, there is a martial arts teacher in New York by name Alan Pittman. He has been teaching martial arts for more than 50 years in New York. He had traveled all over the world, India, China, and so on. He drank deeply at the cultures of all these countries, particularly India. And he wrote many, many scholarly papers published in world dance and music journals. He went to India and delivered special lectures, demonstrations. And here is what he has to say about the influence of India on China. Traditionally, quote, traditionally, the Chinese have credited India and the Buddhist sage Tamo as the source of much of their martial arts. Tamo was in South India at a temple before going to China. Dance and martial arts were closely related. And Mr. Pittman goes on to say that he traced in Chinese practice, he was teaching Chinese martial arts too. He traced 20 movements from Shiva's dance in Kashmir that have been integrated by the Chinese. What we know today as Kung Fu. Kung Fu has 20 movements taken from the Shiva's dance in Kashmir. This is over 2000 years ago. So ladies and gentlemen, here is a perfect example of how cultures are interfacing, and it only needs a little more research to find out how glorious it is. One aspect of one dance or music interfacing with another one and coming full circle. We practice Kung Fu, but we don't know what those movements, where those movements came from. So that is what China. And recently, Balachandra, the great Veena maestro from Carnatic music, he went to China to give a series of concerts, and he found that many melodies, Chinese melodies, were similar to Indian Carnatic music melodies in their scales. Now that is very, very interesting. So maybe I would like to stop here but we have a long way to go. And maybe we can give you some time to interact with what we have said so far. And both Phil and I would handle.
We can have like 5 or 10 minutes of question answer session. Is that good?
Yes.
Before we go, I just noticed, do you see the words etched on that window? Ex-orient lux, you know what that means? It means, it's a Latin expression, it means from the east comes the light.
Goldberg, I have many questions, but I'll stick to one and a half. Indeed, concept of spirituality, I believe, has, I think you can tell it, has two categories to me. One is spirituality with divinity, the other is spirituality without divinity. And I'm referring to Buddhist, Jain, Sankhya school of thought. Which one do you think has more appeal to the West? Spirituality with divinity or spirituality without divinity? The half question is there reason to exclude J. Krishnamurti from the name that Guru's name?
I'll answer the second one first. He asked why Krishnamurti was not in the pictures of the gurus. When I have more time and I do them individually, I mention him, and he's profiled in the book. But he was such an iconoclast that he would be offended to be included with the gurus. When I first started researching the book, when I called the Krishnamurti Foundation in Southern California, and I said, I would like to come up and visit and interview people. They said, why? What's this book? And I said, well, I'm writing about all the gurus who came from India. He wasn't a guru. He was, no, he doesn't belong in that group. I said, okay, let me rephrase that. I'm writing about all the important philosophers who came here from India. Oh, okay. So I didn't think he'd want to be included with it, because he didn't like them at all. The other question was, if I can paraphrase, you said, you can think of spirituality with form, or spirituality thinking of divinity with form or formless, right?
No, I was thinking spirituality without divinity.
Without divinity,
Not just form,
meaning,
without divinity, like Buddhist concept, agnostic.
yeah. So in Indian terms, in Hindu terms, you might say one is bhakti and another is jnana, right? Or as Ramakrishna, when people used to come to Ramakrishna and he'd say, okay, we're going to talk, do you prefer to talk about God with form or God without form? Because in the cosmology of the Veda, it's both. There's, God can be, we can understand divinity with infinite number of forms, or as formless, as absolute, unborn, unchanged, beyond material, beyond manifestation. What came mostly to the West was non-dual Vedanta, formless, unmanifest divinity, or non-divinity. That aspect of the teachings was presented in such a brilliantly modern, rational way that it had a great appeal to the West, because it was compatible with science, it was compatible with reason and logic, and did not require anybody to believe in something fanciful or what they thought was unbelievable. There were always bhaktas. There was always a bhakti element. There were, like, in Vivekananda's Vedanta Society, the close devotees did Kali Pujas, but the teachings presented to the larger public were Advaita Vedanta. Now we're seeing more bhakti. We're seeing kirtan being sung by Westerners. We're seeing Westerners with orientation toward worshipful relationship to divinity with form in whatever Ishta Devata, whatever preferred form they have. So that's starting to come up, but for the most part, it was the what you were calling the non-deistic or non-theistic aspect of the teachings that caught on. But especially with the presence in the West now of people of Indian descent and temples arising over the landscape, the other half of the tradition it comes out more and more. Does that make sense?
Goldberg, I have a related question, but first a comment, and I plead my ignorance of the concept. The phrase I was going to ask you to comment on is Soham Brahmoham, which is the traditional way of relating the...
I didn't hear it.
Soham Brahmoham, which is the traditional way of relating the individual. The two questions I had for you is this. Is it possible that the concept of the Trinity came to the Christian religion from India? Because neither in the Judaic religion nor in Islam is there any such concept. And the related question is what you described, of course, in a sense is the teaching of Shankaracharya as expounded by Swami Vivekananda. Could you explain again why that is more sort of acceptable to a traditionally Christian culture?
I have no opinion on whether the Christians got the concept of the Trinity from India. You would probably encounter great objection to that if you proposed it to Christian historians. Sometimes I'm asked if it was true that Jesus went to India in the missing years of his life. I abstain from that. I have no opinion on that either. But I will say this, when I read the New Testament for the first time, I had already read the Upanishads. And when I read the New Testament, I said, oh, I get it, he was a Sadguru. So there's some overlap there, and a lot of Christians get great inspiration from the Hindu tradition. Why was sort of Advaita Vedanta more acceptable? I think it's because we in the West, well, it's really, there's a multifaceted answer. We in the West are very, this is a scientific age, so we're evidence-based. And we're pragmatic. I think one of the reasons these teachings caught on so much was because the gurus who came were smart enough to never ask anybody to be a Hindu or a Buddhist. They just said, here are these ideas, here are these practices, try them out. If they work, use them. If you're a secular person, you can think of these teachings as a form of self-improvement or as a scientific experiment. Here's a hypothesis, here's a practice, see if it works. If you're a religious person, you don't have to convert. You can use these teachings to be a better Christian or Jew. And that was, for Westerners, very accommodating and very unthreatening, except if you're a fundamentalist, and very rational. And it was amenable to science. It was not religion that conflicted with science like some of the Western religions do. And so I think that spirit of Western pragmatism and rationality found these teachings more appealing than the traditional bhakti practices of temple Hinduism in India, which would have just seemed to many people as exotic. And the other factor here, and I'll be brief about this, is that the people who were first initially most drawn to Vivekananda, to the Gita, to Yogananda, all the other teachings, were people who were either not interested in the religion of their upbringing or were alienated from it because they saw them as superstitious and closed-minded. But they were open to what they could see as a philosophy or a practical approach to inner development. And that's how the teachings were presented.
To add a comment to that bhakti element, what I have seen during my researches on this topic of music and dance is that the bhakti element which limited, for example, Odissi or Bharatanatyam, because they came out of the temples, rituals, bhakti element, the devotional element, and they had certain inbuilt restrictions. For example, the space they could use on the stage, the movements. And what I have discovered is these dance forms went out into the world based on the Navarasas, the 9 rasas or the basics of aesthetics as contained in Bharata's Natya Shastra. What has happened in the last, particularly 80 years, is there is an attempt by famous dancers in India, like Mrinalini Sarabhai, like Anita Ratnam, like Chandralekha, like Kurwala in New York, and many, many others who have consciously tried to get into the modern age and divest or get rid of that bhakti element. In other words, dance is tending to become more pure. I don't know if I said it correctly. In other words, pure dance element. And the trends are that in this globalization of Indian dance and music, the bhakti element will remain forever in a very small coterie, in a very small section. But there are parallel experiments going on. What did the West give to the East, India? They taught us, the ballet technique taught, use the space on the stage more than you have been using now. That's what the West has taught. That is the interfacing. And what did the Bharatanatyam, Odissi and Kathak and all these forms teach to the ballerinas? They taught them use the body more than you have been using, because ballet has inbuilt restrictive elements about the movement of the body. And so, suddenly in the last 40, 50, I'm going back to Anna Pavlova, 100 years ago. When she went, 1931, when she went to England and she had Uday Shankar, and they both went, Anna Pavlova went to India to study and met Rukmini Devi. Rukmini Devi wanted to learn ballet from Anna Pavlova. She said, no, no, no. You learn more about your culture, you learn Bharatanatyam, so on and so forth. So, Anna Pavlova took something, Martha Graham took something. I'll be dealing with those people, how very briefly tomorrow, how they have influence. But the point is, on the Bhakti element, there are trends to divest Bhakti element as you know, you do what you want, these are our dance forms. You do what you want, this is our philosophical basis. This is the way the movement is going on. I think that answers your question.